Promise me you gonna stack. Promise me you gonna ball. Promise me you'll invest 3/4 of it all. Who said that? I'm Mike Sanchez.
And I'm Eric Howard.
We're interviewing thousands of people to learn how they manage their finances. Talking about money's super awkward. We're trying to change that. The more open we are about our finances, the more we can learn from each other and improve our own. This is Safe Space Finance, a place for honest and inclusive conversations about money. So in today's episode, we're talking about the most essential building block of financial preparedness, budgeting. We'll talk about what it is, why you should do it, how to establish a budget, and even some apps that'll help you to streamline the process as you're building your budget and even optimizing it in the future.
We'll probably even talk a little bit about some of our favorite ones to use.
Yes, I got some picks. I know you're a YNABber. I get that.
Yeah.
You're a zero-based budgeting YNABber, but I'm Team Mint, so we'll talk about that.
I have my preferences. Yeah.
Okay, so I think it's probably good for us to get all on the same page about what a budget even is. I think budgeting is really just a plan for how you're going to spend and save your money. And it helps you prioritize pretty much everything in your whole financial picture so that you can make sure that all the actions you're taking are aligned with your goals and that you can track your progress towards your goals. Budgeting isn't so much about restricting your spending. I think some people do view it as that. I think the idea of a budget for a lot of people is maybe intimidating, maybe even boring to some. But to me, it helps you to understand your true current state and on some level yourself. You can see your spending patterns when you're forced to look at your own spending over each month and allocate dollars towards things and track and itemize expenses, etc. So you really do get a great sense for, okay, what am I spending my money on and where is it going? And that, I think, grounds you and gives you sort of like the freedom to then start saying, okay, how can I then change this and how can I make some better decisions, etc.
And I would say, Mike, to that point, I think that's actually core to budgeting is the flexibility of a budget. Is that, and we'll get into this in a little bit, is that as you start budgeting and you start understanding where you're actually spending money, that's when you start to flex and change your budget over time to improve, to actually move your money in directions that you want it to go.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And, I think we've talked about this a couple times, but, I think with every sort of like life stage that I've had, I've revisited my budget frequently, right? When we had Cam, we had to revisit the budget. Right now, all of a sudden, I'm thinking about a 529, and how does that interact with all of the other sort of items I was allocating towards? So I think you do have to revisit it and sort of recognize that it's like a living thing, and there's some beauty in that. It's not so finite, and you set it and forget it. I think that also the budget is, for me, the essential building block to your future wealth. It's so difficult to even know if you have enough in savings to go buy that home or to, invest in that ETF or that mutual fund you're looking at. It really all starts with understanding your income and your expenses and really your cash flow. That's what gives you the freedom to go do all of those other fun things with your money. And, the budget is really something that gives you control over your finances. It helps you to avoid overspending and accruing debt. It ensures that you have savings for your goals. And most importantly to me, I think it gives you peace of mind. When you actually have allocated every single dollar and you sort of know where everything's going, you know that you're saving towards your goals, you can feel good about it. I think that reduces your financial stress, and I think that just uplifts your quality of life.
Yeah, and one thing I would add to that, and I was just speaking with my parents this past week because they're nearing retirement, and it hadn't really crossed my mind in quite the way, but since we were preparing for this budgeting conversation, I had that lens as I was talking to them, and as they're actually setting out and preparing for retirement, they wouldn't be able to make the plan that they have in place if they didn't understand their current situation with enough granularity to be able to forecast that out and make plans over a 25, 30 year window, right? So you have to understand your current state to even have a sense of what does future state and retirement look like.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point.
All right. So now that we've got a good sense of why we're budgeting, let's talk through some of the foundational approaches of how you could go about setting up an actual budget. I'm a big fan of YNAB, and we'll come back to that app later in this episode. But at its core is this idea of zero-based budgeting, which is to say that every dollar you have goes somewhere. It has a job, and you can only assign dollars that you've actually got in your bank account, right? You can't be talking about future money and income that you think you might get 3 months from now. You're talking about what you've got right now, but you give every single dollar, every single penny a job. To do that, we first need to go through a process of just understanding our current state. So if I were setting up a budget for the first time right now, what I would do is look back over my last couple months of expenses. I'd look at my bank accounts, I'd look at my credit cards. And from that, I would start to create an initial list of categories, right? Rent, mortgage, groceries, eating out, car payments, so on. From those categories, I would look at my bank account now and understand how much I actually have on hand. How much cash do I have on hand? I would start to divvy that cash up across those categories, whether I'm in an Excel spreadsheet or in YNAB. And I'd say, if I've got $1,000 in the bank, I'm splitting that up against my budget, right? Against those categories of what I think I have to do next month. So now I've got an initial rough swag at a budget. I'm going to start recording every single expense, and I'm going to assign it that category. I'm going to put it in one of those categories. If I didn't have that category, I'll create a new category, right? This is very flexible and really iterative in the first process. I'm going to keep recording as I spend money. I'm going to keep recording as money comes in. That's going to go on for about a month or two, and that's going to give me at least an initial pass, of what I think are realistic categories and how I am actually spending my money. So now that I understand where my money's going, how much is coming in, where it's going, I can take that ground truth and I can actually start to set goals. And I can adjust my budget appropriately to start to meet those goals. So that ground truth gives me a really good sense of what's coming in, where it's going, right? And that is crucial for goal setting, because now I have a really good perspective on what is static, like rent or mortgage, and things that are flexible, like eating out. I might have a category for eating out, but I can flex that if I need to make other static necessary payments.
Yeah, and I mean, when I think about some of the static stuff, I think that's really difficult to change, right? And there's like some of the other things that are like a little bit more fluid, right? Like we all have a Netflix subscription. We all have, random things that we're subscribed to, like an Instacart or, any of those kind of situations. And I think what I've found sort of helpful is obviously you got to mind your static, but also looking at those negotiable bills is what I'd call them. There's like cable bills. I've seen people get their cable bills lowered, and there are certain services that I know that are inside of some of these apps. So like one is called Bill Shark, for example. There's another one that's called Truebill, and they will literally go contact the company, and they will try to negotiate your bill down. And if they negotiate your bill down a certain amount, they'll take a fee, but you'll get in some of those savings, right? You'll take a share of some of those savings. I've seen that. The Truebill is much more focused on sort of canceling unused subscriptions. So like, if you subscribe to something you just completely forgot, or sometimes we sign up for like a freemium service and then we put our credit card down and all of a sudden they got our credit card and they started billing us. We're like, oh my God, I can't believe I signed up for that and I didn't cancel it in time. They'll actually flag those things for you and help you cancel those subscriptions. So, I think that's also something to mind. But I mean, we all know, right? If you want to change your financial picture, it's really about the static things. It's about, hey, should I be maybe giving up this Tesla and getting into a Volkswagen? Do I need the home in this exact neighborhood, or could I be over here in this neighborhood, right? Those critical decision points is really where you start to separate yourself from a financial standpoint from being strapped and having very limited flexibility inside of your budget to having a ton of freedom to sort of play because you're not so strapped by certain static investments.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Mike, because I think that the next thing, right, the final thing of once you have your budget set up is that when you understand it, you understand what's static, you understand what's flexible. That now allows you to start to come up with, you can identify your goals, you can prioritize your goals, and then you can set realistic targets on a monthly basis or whatever cadence your pay comes in, right, for those various goals. And some of them it's going to take a little bit more time to be able to actually adjust because you will have to adjust some of the static bits
right.
within your budget to start to hit those targets that you're shooting for. And those can be things like setting up an emergency fund, paying down high interest debt, right? Saving for retirement, saving up down payment for a house. You name it, any one of those things can become a category if you want within your budget that you're squirreling away some money every month. That money has a job and it's going towards putting it towards an emergency fund, right? That has its own job.
Yeah, I brought this up with like a couple of family members, and one of the things that they said is like, well, I can budget for most things, but then there's like these weird things that always mess up my budget. Like, as soon as December hits, we're coming around the holiday season, right? We're about to hit Thanksgiving in the whole stride, and people complain because you get to December and you're buying a bunch of gifts for family members, friends, nephews, nieces, etc., and you're not planning for all these things, right? And I remember it kind of hit me hard when I was around 27, 28 years old, and everybody started getting married. I was just like, oh my God, I got a new wedding gift I got to get every week. Like, it's crazy. And I think what I've seen that is effective is setting up sinking funds. So you kind of set up these buckets where you say, okay, you know what? I generally know that I'm going to have to spend money in this category. I don't know exactly what the amount is, but I can guess in a good sort of range there. And I know, hey, I might say I'm going to spend $1,000 this year on silly wedding gifts that they're probably not going to use and they're going to put in some cabinet somewhere. But I'm going to get it. And so I'm going to put that and sort of assign a job to it. And so a portion of dollars are going to go into this sinking fund for, wedding gifts for, a period of time so that when they pop up, I'm prepared for that particular thing, even though it's not a set expense that I can say is truly like regular.
I think in a weird way that's actually probably the secret to like successful budgeting right there. I can tell you like car insurance, right? It recurs, it comes through. I think ours we pay every 6 months or something like that, and it adjusts because the value of your car goes down and the county has some different value, all that kind of stuff. But I do the exact same thing. It's like, okay, I'll squirrel away some because I know that car insurance, it's coming around at some point. So there's a sinking fund for that, right? Like, so yeah, I completely agree. Like, sinking fund is like, if you can figure out both your static and flexible, but then when you can start to just layer in $20, $30 for something that is coming, you don't know the exact amount, it just buffers it. It makes it that much less of a shock when it finally lands on your credit card or in your bank account where you finally have to pay for it.
Absolutely. And I haven't done what I should do with checking my insurance and checking it against other companies, and I know that's something I need to do. But one thing that I did do was during COVID, I took my Allstate auto insurance for both my car and my wife's car, and I changed them over to MileWise because we weren't driving our cars anywhere.
Yeah.
So,
oh man, I got to check that out. I don't know that. Yeah. Okay. Is that a way where it's like it's based on how much you actually drive?
yeah, it's really interesting. So Allstate, I basically called them and I said, hey, what are my options here to save, because like I'm not moving my car ever. And they were like, well, you could switch to MileWise and the coverage is the exact same. It's just we bill you differently, and it's going to be based on how much you actually use your car versus just a static payment. So they send an odometer reader. So like it has this thing, you kind of stick it in some compartment inside of your car right under the steering wheel, and It measures everything about how you drive. They don't dock you for anything like hard braking or speeding or anything, but they actually do tell you in the app. They're like, you had a good drive today. but it was kind of like,
nice, yeah.
I don't know about what.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's pretty intrusive.
Like you're really in here, yeah.
But I think what was kind of interesting was I calculated it out, and I think across both cars we were paying $23 a month for about I don't know, about a year. And just recently I thought maybe I should change it back because we're driving our cars a lot now. Also because I realized that I do want to maybe tweak our policy a little bit, but I think it's going to fold into more of a broader discussion about going and looking at my other options, right? Because like Allstate, I've been with them, and it was natural. I had a condo at first, and it was with Allstate for the property insurance there. We have a home now. Allstate is the coverage option, the cars, so it's all sort of bundled. But I'm thinking, I've been talking to a lot of people, and I've heard that a lot of people have generated a lot of savings just by switching to another company. And sometimes when they switch, they actually get more coverage, which is just incredible to get more for even less. And so I think it's just one of those things where you absolutely have to do the diligence, and you have to shop around, and you're kind of hurting yourself if you're not doing it.
We're due for one right now. We started with Geico, and I think at some point we like Liberty Mutual somehow got wrapped into it for our homeowners insurance. But I think we're due for that shopping, which would recommend everybody do that, because it takes a little bit of time, but it's definitely worth it.
And I think that that's sort of a theme for like most money things, right? It's like you have to put in a little bit more effort, and it's not going to return to you immediately, right? Like over time, though, you're going to reap those benefits every single month moving forward, right? And that's the beauty of it, is like you just have to take the time to say like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to commit to doing it, and you get rewards for doing that over time.
Yeah, and that's I think that's where the benefit of making those adjustments to those static groups, I think, really starts to accrue, right? Is that it takes time. You do have to do some digging. You have to look at your options. But when it finally hits, when it finally starts to free it up, right? Free up that cash on a monthly basis, that's just extra breathing room, right? Goes towards whatever goal you may have, right? It could be saving for a car, it could be retirement, could whatever your goal is, you now have extra cash to be able to put towards that.
Right. Now let's talk about some apps. I think that there's some fantastic apps for budgeting, but even sort of beyond budgeting, just some apps that really help you track your whole financial picture. I think this is pretty common now. There's a ton of them. I think there's Mint, there's YNAB, there's Personal Capital, there's Monarch Money, there's Copilot. There's so many different apps now. There aren't that many, though, that are good and that are free. And so for me, that's why I love Mint. Mint, for me, I can track pretty much every single thing in my entire financial universe. I can link any account I have. I can automatically, categorize all the transactions. I can monitor all of my spending and my income. I can even track my taxes. I just think it provides like such a clear picture. And recently they started adding even more features. Like I'm looking at the app now. They've got Bill Shark is integrated now, so they can actually go track some of those bills like I was talking about earlier, like your cable bill, and go negotiate that down for you. You just have to sort of enable it and give it some information about your bill. They track all your credit cards. They have my mortgage as well, so because they have my property value, so I have to give them my address, but they have my property value as per what Zillow or Redfin would value it at. And then they have my actual mortgage, and they know how much I paid down on that. So they can return to me, because they have all this information about my cash on hand and my mortgage, the loan, etc. any sort of credit card debt, etc. They know everything about my whole financial picture, and so they can return to me basically my net worth, right? And they have things like your credit score. I've got all of my brokerage accounts linked so I can see my investments. And I'm someone who I've just over the course of my life, I've had various brokerage accounts because I've switched jobs, or, I started a Roth IRA with, when I was in North Carolina. And so I started with someone, and then, I ended up at one firm, and so I've got like, I don't know, 3 or 4 different brokerage firms that I have to link into Mint, and it kind of seamlessly brings all those things together into like one picture, which is super cool. The feature that they recently added is taxes, and because Intuit owns Mint, they actually are able to give me direct access into my tax returns and my tax filings seamlessly through TurboTax, which is so cool. Like I can click a button, I can see, oh, what was my refund last year? And I can just get that information on the fly. I can download my return for both the federal and state level. I just think it's like super cool. And then even when I go to, on the opposite end of that, when I go to do my taxes each year, it already knows everything about my financial picture, and it just imports so many things that you would think are like, how in the world? It's got my 1099 divs and my 1099 interest forms, like all the things from my brokerage accounts. It's got all the things from my employer group. I just think it's really incredible. Now, I will say this: it isn't full automation, Eric. Like it's not like I can just set it and forget it and never have to think about it. It's not using AI to categorize every single expense 100% accurate every single time. Recently, I started with M1 Finance. I started a new investment account with M1 Finance so I could invest in ETFs and do automatic recurring investments. And for whatever reason, I set up a weekly payment. And for whatever reason, it was categorizing the expense as a transfer, so it wasn't showing up as a real expense. So when I looked at my cash flow seemed high, and I was like, wow, what's happening? Did I make more money? Like I don't know what's going on here. And it turned out that the M1 payment was showing up as a transfer, so it wasn't being counted as an expense against me, which looked like it was inflating my cash flow. And by recategorizing that as a true expense, as a buy into an investment, it then showed up with a much more accurate and kind of disappointing, but my cash flow didn't look as good. But in general, I love the app, and I think it does make, even if you're not willing to sit down and do a budget on a spreadsheet, this is something where like, okay, you can link all of your stuff, and then you've got sort of like a fun and easy way to set up, budgeting targets and all that kind of stuff, and it makes it pretty easy.
How well does it work, given that we were talking about syncing funds? What's it like setting something like that up in Mint? I personally don't use Mint. I haven't in a long time. I guess it's been a long time since I have used it. I years ago tried it out when I was kind of testing out different budgeting apps.
Yeah, so I think you could do it. I don't think it's like, it's not going to be perfect, right? They do all the normal things, right? They have sort of like categories, like pre-built categories. You can create new categories, and you could say like, here's a new category, and here's how much I want to spend on that category each month. That's my goal, right? But it's not like a traditional zero-based budgeting setup where it's like, hey, I'm going to tell you exactly where everything is going to go based on dollars that I have today. That's not how it works. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So I guess on the flip side, right? I from the perspective of like, I use YNAB, right? I mean, I think there's a lot going for all of that connectiveness that you just talked through with Mint. But in my budgeting, I have found a lot of success in that very hands-on nitty gritty. And YNAB over the years, it started originally as a computer, just an actual program on my computer, to then being a web-based app, now with an app on my phone, all that kind of stuff. And it does have a yearly subscription fee. There's like you get like 30 days or something of like a free trial.
Okay.
But there is, unlike Mint, there is an annual subscription, but I have found it for myself to be such a powerful tool for successfully setting and maintaining a budget, that I'm I'm willing to pay the yearly subscription.
Well, maybe
And I
when.
have a sinking fund for it.
Oh, you do.
I have a sinking fund to pay the annual fee for it.
Maybe if we get popular enough, they'll give you a loyalty account.
Get a free subscription. Yeah, that'd
This
be
this
great.
episode is sponsored by. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I know you're a YNABber, and I think that's great.
Yeah.
I'll say this too. Like for Mint, I love it for almost all things. One big shortcoming that I found though is on the investment side. I think that a lot of apps are actually a little bit more robust when it comes to tracking your investments. For me,
Yeah.
I'm not so like what is my balance at the moment. I'm much more interested in what's my performance over time, what's my return over time,
Yeah.
and it doesn't provide that. Like it doesn't
Right.
calculate it, and I'm like, well, you got the data, just do
Yeah,
it.
yeah, it's all there.
Just
Yeah,
do
yeah.
it. And
Yeah.
because of that, what I ended up doing is I downloaded this thing called Personal Capital many years ago. It's now called Empower. So it's got a different name, but it's like Personal Capital Empower.
Yeah.
It. And what I've learned is that it is very similar, right? Like you
Yeah.
can link almost every single account, and get your
Yeah.
property in there, and it tracks your net worth, and it can do the cash flow and all that kind of stuff. Interestingly enough, because of the categorization stuff that underlies each of those apps, I do get a different cash flow number, right? So
Yeah.
your categorization matters.
It does.
It matters.
Yeah.
And so, but generally, they're not thousands off. It's like, they might be a couple hundred
Yeah.
off or something like that. But,
Yeah.
one thing I love about Personal Capital is when it comes to my investments, I can actually like compare. It builds this thing called a U index. So it looks at every single thing that you've got. And I mean, for me, it's complex, right? Because I've got my Vanguard stuff, I got my Fidelity stuff, largely mutual fund kind of stuff. But then I've also got like true full on ETF portfolios, and some of those are like more specialty ETFs. And it knows the exact investments I've got, even investments I've got with a financial advisor down in North Carolina, which he has like my Roth IRA and a couple other things. But like he's invested in all sorts of weird things that I don't even know about, like I artisan funds and, so it's so cool because it actually looks across all those things and the performance across all of those things over time. And then it develops this thing called a U index that says like, hey, your entire portfolio, here's how you've been performing over the years, right? 90 day, 1 day, lifetime, etc. And then you can compare it against benchmarks like a blended portfolio, like a blended 3-fund portfolio or an S&P or whatever. So I because I don't have that readily available inside of Mint, I actually have to download Personal Capital for that. But I think that's one of the things that I enjoy about Personal Capital. But if you're someone who is more on the investing side and that's really important to you, just know that you could probably get away with just getting Personal Capital. And you could use that for your budgeting and your cash flow and all that kind of stuff, as an alternative to Mint. Or you could do what I do and just have both.
Yeah. Well, I don't do either of those. I should check out maybe the Personal Capital.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think from my perspective, I look at YNAB and I think this would probably be the way that they would say that they like their philosophy, right? Which is that one of the main call outs when you're in your budget, you're actively like in there adjusting your categories and the money assigned to each of those categories is the age of your money. So like we were talking about earlier, their philosophy starts with like track your expenses, know your current state, flex your budget, and then age your money. And that's like their entire you can pull all that stuff in. You can pull in like Mint, you can pull in your like if you have a mortgage and you can make active payments and watch it. Like here's my interest rate. You don't even have to link the account. You can just kind of set it up and it will automatically calculate principal and interest payments and all that kind of stuff if you want, so that you can have a centralized, like a centralized personal net worth, report or something like that.
Yeah.
But their entire reason for existence is that age of money. They believe that like if you get beyond 30 days, so a dollar comes in on the first of the month, but you don't technically spend it until the first of the next month, that you've now reached a point where you have enough flexibility and buffer in your flow of money, right? Money coming in, money going out, that you have some real, an unexpected thing could happen, and you have enough flexibility to like shift, right?
Yeah.
And not suddenly be set back and be spending money that you don't have.
Yeah.
And I think so they wrap in a lot of stuff, but like where they really go deep, where they really like challenge you to know yourself and to really kind of be oriented to your own budget, is track the dollars, put them to categories, age your money, right?
Yeah.
Constantly challenge yourself
Yeah.
to age it to be above at least 30 days, so that you do have that buffer built into your budget. Even if you don't have like an emergency fund right there in your budget,
Yeah.
having 30 days means that, you know, you've got some wiggle room.
Right. Right. I've been talking with some close friends, and we were having conversations about money, and basically, you know, he was like, y'all should, like, I had one friend, he's like, y'all should have an episode about how married couples handle their finances, like the banking aspect, the budgeting aspect. And I was like, oh, okay, like, I guess we can. And it never really crossed my mind. And the reason it had never crossed my mind is because for me personally, for my wife and I, it's a single pot. It's like, you know, all of the checks flow into that pot, and all of the expenses flow out of that pot, right? And so like everything is just in one place, and there's really nothing, there's no fancy footwork, there's no carving out of anything, there's no proportioning, there's nothing that's happening that's interesting. And so when he said it to me, I was like, well, why would I do that? Like, it's not, there's not an episode there. But the more and more I've talked to people, the more and more I've seen, like, there's actually a lot of different permutations about how people manage finances when they're doing them jointly.
Yeah. And, I mean, I think like when it comes to that, it can be fully joint. It can be not joint at all, right? Yeah, each partner keeps their finances, their budget, everything separate. And then there's like a hybrid, and I think that's what we probably do, is like the hybrid, right? We have a single checking account that is the overwhelming majority of where monthly inflow winds up going, because it pays for all of our static funds, right? Like our static categories. So mortgage, we have 529, daycare. Those are like the big ones. We get to this in a different conversation, but we do our own escrow versus having our mortgage company do escrow for us, so we can push that over to a savings account, like a high yield, and capture some of the benefit of that.
You do that because, so like, for example, for us, every year, well, not every year, but like especially in the beginning of both the mortgages we've had, the bank says, hey, you overpaid on the mortgage, you know, you got this escrow build up and surplus, we're going to send you a check, right? And so what you're saying is that you manage your own escrow, and in doing that, instead of overpaying and sort of giving a loan, you're actively managing that and ensuring that you're not overpaying, and then you're taking those funds that you're effectively capturing in real time, and then you're going and using those in a high yield savings account or something like that.
Well, both ways, right? Both ways, because what you're saying, we've had the exact opposite happen. The first couple of years of our mortgage, the bank said, because of what was happening like during the COVID stuff, right? Like where there was the huge boom, property values were shooting through the roof, and so then property taxes and all that kind of stuff were shooting through the roof as well.
Yeah.
And so we would get these nasty grams, which was not our fault. It was their own calculation, right?
Yeah.
But we'd get these nasty grams saying, oh, by the way, you owe extra money to cover the shortfall of the escrow. But the flip side happens, where if you've overpaid, they've been sitting there enjoying the benefit of capturing interest on that money, where you could have been capturing interest, and you only pay. It turns out you only pay property taxes in the state of Virginia twice a year, right? In July, or at least where we are,
Right.
in July, November. So that escrow amount is just sitting in a high yield savings account or like a no penalty CD and making a pretty decent return until you just pull it out one lump sum and pay it.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, that's really interesting. So when it comes to y'all's, like, in the way that you all manage your finances, so
Yeah.
you have your own sort of pot.
So I have my own budget, and then there's a joint budget that we have, and that joint budget's the one that takes into account all of like the majority of our static, right? Like I was saying, like the
So the
mortgage and
and
daycare and all that kind of stuff.
okay,
Yeah.
the big
and
the
and
big
then
ones.
also like monthly pushes to savings accounts and stuff like that if we have a goal that we're tracking towards.
Well, can I ask you this? Like,
Yeah.
what do you think is the advantage of setting up your financial situation like that? Like, what do you think is the advantage of that? Like having the hybrid where you have, like, here's the joint, but then we also have our own, like, pots.
Well, we're able to. I mean, we're able to jointly come up with the goals that we want for our family, right? We're able to determine what's a reasonable amount for daycare. What do we want to put aside for 529s and all that kind of stuff, and that's all of that together is a very high percentage of like what comes in on a monthly basis, right? Like all that stuff, like when you collectively. But then it gives me the flexibility to, I don't know, if I want to be saving for, I don't know, if there's like a concert I want to go to, I can kind of be doing my own little sinking fund over here.
Or a microphone.
Yeah, for a microphone or something like that. Yeah. Or I don't know, for myself, if there's like a piece of like workout equipment or something that I want to get, like I can prioritize what I want to, how I want to kind of squirrel it away for that purchase 3 months down the road or something like that. That's just for me. It's just like and not feel like I'm somehow taking away from, like, we set our overarching goals as a family. We contribute to it without, like, it's just like on autopilot at this point, right? And then the other stuff is like where you kind of get flexible and you prioritize what you want to prioritize. And to be able to do it with some independence, I don't know. I think it's probably comes back to the beginning of how we, I was a graduate student and she had a professional job, and so we were just very different income levels, and so we had to have different approaches to budgeting to some degree, and I think it just kind of has persisted that way. It works for us, right? Like it does.
I mean, like I mean, I haven't talked to some massive sample size about this, but like of the people I've talked to about it, like what I heard, some of it was like, it kind of stemmed from dating. Like just the natural lineage of our relationship is, it was very inequitable in terms of earnings, and it was lopsided. And so we were trying to figure out ways to make things work, and it just didn't make sense to have a joint at that moment. Right. And so that sort of just carried over. Like we were already doing the budgeting. We were already doing all the right mechanics to manage our money together, but then also separately. And so then that just sort of carried over into marriage.
When we were gosh, I haven't thought about this in a long time. When we were dating at the beginning, we would effectively, like, we would split rent and all that kind of stuff down the middle, but we didn't have a joint checking account, so it would be like, PayPal back and forth or something like that. You know what I mean? And then that matured over time to, like, all right, we got to set up like some sort of an account where we can like put some mutual, money and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, you kind of make it work. And then you figure out ways to, once you formalize it a bit, and by that I mean, like, you're going to get married or you are married, and then you start to, bring things together. We've just never landed everything together, right? Like we've never just said, this is the checking account into which everything lands, right?
But I mean, it sounds like probably 90% of everything is coming out of the same pot.
And all of our savings accounts and stuff like that, where we're saving for X, Y, and Z, right? Like, it all, like, that big bucket of money includes what we then, like, partition off to savings, right? So, I mean, like, to your point, an overwhelming majority winds up in that communal family account.
And, we talked about, like, static versus sort of like fluid or
Yeah.
movable kind of objects. Um, I remember when you ended up getting your house.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't get it in like smack dab in the middle of DC. You're
Right.
like kind of a little further out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I went to your house, I was like, "Oh my God, it's so nice here." I was like, I didn't know anything about this area.
Didn't expect this. Yeah.
Um, and I remember just thinking, man, it's so tranquil where you live. Like, I really loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And but then at the same time, you got a really good deal on your property.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you, not only that, you had like, not only was it a good deal just for the property that you had, but you also had the ability to then build onto that.
Yeah.
And I think you're recording
Yeah.
in an addition, basically, right?
Yeah.
Like you're recording
Yeah.
in your new addition. And I think
Yeah.
like for, on the flip side of that, you got me. And,
Right.
my wife and I, we had a condo in DC. We lived above some woman, and she wasn't happy with us because Cam was stomping around and dropping toys and making a whole bunch of noise. And so we wanted to, out of respect, kind of find a way to get into our own situation. So we bought a house, basically like peak of COVID.
Right.
Interest rates were incredibly low, which is not what you can say now, right?
That I pushed us to refinance in the middle of COVID, but man, am I so happy we did.
Oh man,
'cause,
yeah,
they've gone wild, yeah.
you gotta jump on that. And
But it goes to I knew that's our static, right? Like one of our static is if we own a house, there's no way around the fact that you have that monthly outflow, and if there's a way to slice off a sizable, noticeable chunk of like required outflow every month, that now becomes something that, if nothing else, just makes it so that we are more comfortable in a sudden and unexpected and not good change of like jobs or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like we just have that much more buffer.
Yeah.
And so it's like one of those, like now that interest rates have gone haywire and all that kind of stuff, we both like look back and I go, it's
wow,
probably a good decision to have done that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, definitely. I think about it all the time. Just like, at first I was like, to be honest, I was like, man, we're buying. It's a great rate. We got like 2.75 or something. I mean, something silly low,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
I was like, man, it was kind of hard to tell what was happening with the housing market, and,
Yeah.
But we bought, and it's definitely like not stretching our budget, but it was like on the higher end,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it was to the point where I wasn't so comfortable with the monthly, so I just went ahead and recasted it one time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
put a little bit of a lump sum in just to drop it a little bit.
Yeah.
And I feel like I had this moment, I don't know, it was like maybe 3 months after we moved in, where I was like, oh my God, like we overpaid, right? Like we severely overpaid. And I was sort of reading the writing on the wall, and I was like, man, these interest rates are going to go right up. Like they're going to go straight up, and then the value of our home is going to drop even further. And I was kind of worried. And then like over the past year, part of that has played out, right? The interest rates have
Interest
gone
rates
up.
have gone. Yeah.
Oddly, prices have not dropped. And I mean, I'm sure that's a supply and demand sort of relationship, probably undersupply, but every time I look at Zillow or Redfin, the home value is going up, and the interest rates are going up. It's just like the weirdest thing, and I'm like, so I'm not sure. I'm still not quite sure. I'm like, are we out of the woods, or is this whole thing just gonna like pop? Because I can't really tell.
Yeah, I am not an economist, so but likewise, I thought that when interest rates shot through the roof, that home values would start to cool off a bit, and I'm sure in different parts of the country they have. I think DC is a little bit of an anomaly, right? It's a notoriously pretty stable housing market, not to the benefit of people who are trying to buy a home, but to the benefit of the people who own a home, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, the thing is, the supply is low because people aren't leaving their homes. Because like I can't leave my home right now because I'm not going to go jump into an
Right.
8% interest
Right.
rate, and
Yep.
then
Yep.
so no one's leaving their homes, so it's a lot of new construction things that are like brand spanking new.
Hmm.
But then I don't know, like I talked to a couple of colleagues, and I have one friend. He's in sort of like the Boston area, right on like the
Hmm.
outskirts of Boston, and they're trying to buy in the suburbs of Boston. And he's like, I could have bought during COVID. I can't buy
Yeah.
now. And I
Yeah.
just talked to somebody who's another colleague. He's in New Hampshire, or no,
Hmm.
Vermont. He's in Vermont, and he was like, yeah, I completely missed it. Like,
Yeah.
I just can't do it
Yeah.
now.
If the home value is the same, but the interest rate is double,
Yeah,
your monthly outflow requirement is
yeah,
sizably different.
yeah. So I
Yeah.
mean, I thought it was. I thought at first like, oh, maybe it is just DC. But the
Hmm.
more and more I talk to people, it's like a shared experience for a lot of
Yeah.
folks. So
Yeah.
I just don't know what's going to happen in the future, and we'll see. But I feel like a little bit more confident now than I was before about our
Hmm.
home purchase and home value and all that kind of stuff. And I do have we do have the ability actually to build in our back. It's like
Hmm.
it's called an accessory dwelling unit, so you can
Oh,
build
nice. Yeah.
up to 22 feet and I think it's like a cap on the amount of square footage. It's not large, but you can
Hmm.
basically build what is a carriage home right above
Got
your
it.
garage, that kind of thing. And I mean, it's just expensive. That's the problem, right? Like labor and the architects right now are just like charging wild amounts of money for the designs.
Yeah.
And they are like a big block on the process. But we actually have a
Yeah.
neighbor right across the alley that's building his, and his is almost done. So I was thinking about going over there and asking him about his experience. But I've seen people basically build those and rent them out to sort of offset some of their mortgage. Some people take out like home equity lines of credit. People have other strategies and all that kind of stuff. But in general, I see it mainly done by people who've been living in those homes for a very long time because they can
Yeah.
borrow against the equity of their home. Whereas for me, we just moved in
Yeah.
here, so I don't think I could. But
Right. HELOCs come with all kinds of requirements
yeah,
of principal to value, and then percentages that they'll actually lend you. Yeah.
yeah. So I don't know, but it is interesting. Like I think just bringing it back to the static piece, it's like
Hmm.
for us, part of our static infrastructure is this
Hmm.
house, which is expensive, right? And
Yeah.
smack dab in the middle of DC, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we've learned to, we've grown into it and all that kind of stuff, so we're okay. But it's just one of those things where, had we made a different decision, we might have a lot more
Hmm.
flexibility and all that kind of stuff. And so it's just something that people have to keep in mind.
Yeah. No, I mean, when we were budgeting and effectively kind of coming up with that value, right, for how much home could we purchase, it was, I think it was like it all came back to actually what our monthly budget was, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like at the end of the day, it was, yeah, it was about down payment. Yeah, it was about like, things like that.
Sure.
But at the end of the
Yeah.
day, it was about what is our, what's the monthly outflow requirement that we would feel comfortable if one of us lost a job, like where we could like squeeze it with one person working. Like, man, we'd have to like sell off a car. We'd have to, all this kind of stuff. We'd have to like change our day to day, but we'd be able to, at the end of the day, like service the mortgage, keep the house,
Yeah.
put food on the table,
Yeah.
have one car to be able to get the kids to like daycare, so that
Yeah.
the person who didn't have a job could like continue to focus on getting a job and all that kind of stuff. Like
Right.
that was like
Right.
when we were going through that math, like it was less about the math and it was more about like what's the risk level we were willing to take, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And obviously things change and people have different risk tolerance. I think I'm a pretty risk averse.
You
When
don't
it
say.
comes to, yeah, yeah. In some things, other things I'm probably a little more open to it, but
Yeah.
when it comes to like if I'm putting my name on a dotted line for, an indefinite, for the most part, indefinite payment to somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
I want to be pretty confident that I can make that.
Yeah, that's fair.